You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We love MotoGP. Hello and welcome to Missed Apex MotoGP Podcast. This is a show put together by MotoGP fans pretending to be experts. We aim to have a race review show ready for a midweek commute. We may just be punters, but we love to talk. The 2025 season is finally here, and it started in a rather family-friendly fashion as the Marquezes dominated the weekend, but not without some pesky pressure issues. As ever, I am your host, Kyle Power, and today I'm joined in the virtual shed by some fellow MotoGP enthusiasts. It's co-host Jules Seegers. How's it going, Jules?
What's up, Kyle? Don't want to start the pod on a downer, but I didn't think I would need a battle for the win as much as I noticed I did during these weekend's races.
We were spoiled.
Missing Jorge Martin already.
Yeah, indeed, we were spoiled last year, unfortunately. We're also spoiled by our token Northerners presence, Danny Henny. How's it going, Danny?
Hey, Kyle. Looking forward to talking about this one. I wasn't down watching the race. I was excited for the racing to start again. So, yeah, some interesting points. Looking forward to get into it.
Excellent. And we're also joined by the tyre-obsessed trumpeter, Matt Trumpets. How's it going, Matt?
Unlike everyone else, I'm super excited about this race because ultimately it is all about tires.
It was indeed. Awesome. Without further ado, let's get into it then. So, weekend overview. There's not much to overview this weekend apart from the major story that Jorge Martin, unfortunately, was not in Thailand, had another crash. We covered this on our preview show, but the actual injury looks a bit more serious than first thought now. It's a scaphoid problem. The scaphoid has ended many riders' careers, most notably in recent times. James Toseland, double World Superbike champion, couldn't really ride bikes again, tried to come back too early. The reason for that is the scaphoid in the wrist, the bone, has very little blood supply. So if they try, and typical riders will try to rush coming back, damage it, you get then the lack of fusion in the bone and a whole world of pain. So really devastating news for Jorge Martin, but it's not over. If he doesn't rush back, he should be okay, but hopefully we get to see him as soon as. But personally, I hope he sits out until the European rounds now and makes sure he gets back and that wrist is fixed. But rotten luck, and it's rotten luck for us viewers as well, because I think we've been denied some good action that he was going to bring on that Aprilia. So get well soon, Jorge, from all of us here at Missed Apex, and hopefully we'll see him back in the European season. So we'll go into practice and quali, and we'll skim over these bits fairly quickly. But the major talking point in practice for me was Bagnaia having to go through Q1. And ever since testing, he was struggling. He was struggling here, but to be fair to Bagnaia, this really wasn't his. Well, you say it wasn't his fault. He wasn't quick enough to originally be there, Jules, but he got a little bit stitched up by Morbidelli and then the false yellow flag.
He did, and you could fault Morbidelli for everything or whatever happened in front of him that made him slow down. But we said in our season review in 24, and we also discussed it recently, that Bagnaia needed to get rid of these getting up to speed slowly weekends and not really nailing it on the Friday and then using the sprint to really set up for the Sunday, that he needed to be there spot on from the get-go. And it wasn't happening. And of course, he had a lap time deleted that shouldn't have been deleted, etc. But opposed to what Bagnaia did, what Marquez did was like straight away, first outing and set the time, and Bagnaia left it late, so he wasn't on it as we all said, and of course he should have been listening to us as we all said he should have been.
Absolutely, he was kind of somewhat on the back foot, Trumpets. Well, ever since testing landed here, really.
Well, yeah, and this is where it gets very curious, because it seems kind of obvious at this point that the updates they brought to the bike, which isn't the full 25 bike, but the changes they've made, haven't really helped him at all. I think I would take issue. We did say he had to show up and not be casual and take the whole weekend to get together. But I think if you look at his whole weekend, I think he extracted the maximum he had this weekend. So I would give him a pass on that grade. I'm not going to fail him on that. But where I get really curious is it was very clear to me that I don't think Morbidelli intentionally hung him out to dry when he got in the way, although it was clearly his fault because he got a penalty for it. And I didn't see anyone saying he shouldn't get a penalty. But what I want to talk about is the yellow flag, because they got all up in arms about the yellow flag. But the stewards basically said, like, yeah, we see your point. You're right. It was a total mistake. Nevertheless, this is not a precedent we're going to set here and now. I'm just curious, because you have much longer histories in MotoGP, if you agree with that decision.
Just before we go to Danny, this yellow flag was a bit out of order, really. So basically what happened is they erroneously put the yellow flag out in a sector where it didn't need to be. And generally what happens, if there's a yellow flag out, the rider's laps get automatically deleted. So the lap that Bagnaia done would have been good enough for him just to scrape into the top 10, but they deleted it. And they did admit after the session, this is Simon Crayfar's new sort of race director now, is there, but they did admit that it was a mistake, but they were not going to reinstate the lap, which I don't agree with. I agree if it was an honest mistake by the stewards that they should reinstate the lap, but they had sound logic why they didn't reinstate the lap, and that was because they didn't want to set a precedent. They didn't want to say, they don't basically want the riders to then second guess whether it's an erroneous yellow flag or not. They want the riders to see the yellow flag and instantly back off, as they should, and instantly think their lap's cancelled to not endanger Marshall. So that is very sound logic, because if they set a precedent now, other riders could just see a yellow flag saying, oh, this could be a mistake, keep it pinned, and then try to argue it later and go straight into the danger zone. So that's the reason why I agree with their logic. I don't agree with them not giving the lap back. Danny?
Yeah, just going back to the Bagnaia point, I mean, he was unlucky with the yellow flag, but that was one lap out of the weekend. You know, the rest of the weekend, he didn't look good. He hasn't looked good in testing. You know, he's on a bit of a, I won't say a downer, but he hasn't really struck at Mark yet since they've been teammates. And he's kind of carried over that slow start form, would you say, from the end of last season. So he needs to try and pick it up. It's a worry, really. I expected him to be a bit slow off the start and then kind of fire back at Mark in one of the sessions. But he just looked off it all weekend. He looked behind the... I'll tell you what he looked like. He looked like the bike was riding him rather than the other way around. He was second-guessing the bike all the time. Didn't really see, other than in the sprint race or the race on Sunday where he had a bit of a wobble. That was the first time I really saw the bike move around on him. The rest of it, he looked quite within his comfort zone and a bit resigned to being beaten for the weekend.
Yeah, it was odd, and he's kind of alluded to this, saying he had loads of technical problems in testing, which I don't think actually technical problems preventing him from running. I think the problems he alludes to were he just couldn't get a good feeling or gel with the bike nicely, and then didn't test a load of stuff as a result. So he's constantly playing catch up. So he wasn't looking great. But all of that considered, then he's come through Q1. He's kept his head and he's put it P3 on the grid. So fair play, he's still done all right. But he was beaten by the Grassini GP24 of Alex Marquez, who was having a blinding weekend. It's been basically a Marquez 1-2 throughout the entirety of the weekend, all in practice and a thing, which is absolutely amazing. So Marc Marquez ends up getting pole, no surprise there. His brother in second, a dream result for that family. Bagnaia in third. On honourable mention already was Ogura in P5, 2 Yamahas in the top 10, and the Honda's narrowly missing out on the top 10, which is a precursor of things to come in the sprint. So on to the sprint review then, and well, it kind of went the way the timesheets were very much suggesting it was going to go. It was a Marc Marquez dominance with his brother Alex following him home, and Bagnaia struggling to keep up with them. Now, there's one really interesting thing, so I'll go to you here, Matt, first, was Bagnaia could not get a good feeling on the soft tyre. So everyone was running soft. I think soft on the rear for the sprint. But Bagnaia chose a hard front just to try to do something because he was struggling with the soft, but it didn't work out for him.
And this is where the old tire thing gets incredibly interesting, because I did a little reading after watching the race, and what it boils down to is he's struggling to get the bike to feel right under hard braking. So because of the incredible track temperatures. I mean, I think they were like 55°C on Saturday. It was super hot. He chose the hard tire to give him better braking. But what he found was that it lacked the edge grip necessary to go with that braking. So he picked it to have better resistance essentially to twisting and the high heat. But then he couldn't take that speed through the corner in the way that he would like because the front lacked the grip for him to achieve the, I assume, lean angles that would let him do that. So you already see he's trying to use the tires essentially to substitute for what I would think of as either electronic or mechanical setup issues that he hasn't fully solved with this bike. Whereas Marquez, going from the 23 bike, adapted almost perfectly to the bike that they gave him. And this is where the battle is right now for Bagnaia. He needs to get that bike in his pocket.
Yeah, because it's odd, because on paper, Bagnaia should be the one who was most used to this package. It's very close to 24. He's the most experienced on this bike. Oddly, yeah, they've got a few different bits. They've got the swing arm and some suspension bits and a different ride height device. But yeah, Bagnaia just hasn't gelled with it. As you say, he just completely hasn't gelled with it, and is not desperation. He just felt like he felt better on the hard front. And did you hear him saying after the race, talking to the other two riders in the cool down room? He was basically saying it was basically saying the hard degraded more than the soft. It just completely fell off. So as you mentioned, lack of edge grip, maybe his then sliding more, got a bit of graining, and it's just dropped off, and it's not really worked well at all for him. So he was staring down a bit of a grim prospect for the Grand Prix. He's either going to stay on a hard tyre, which he doesn't like, or have to use the soft, which he hasn't done much running on. He was kind of sticking on the hard most of the weekend. But behind the top three then, they are all pulling away nicely. We have a debutant, Ayagura, the current reigning Moto2 world champion, on the Trackhouse Aprilia, not even the official Aprilia, on the Trackhouse Aprilia, which looked stunning in that Golf livery. By the way, it looks really, really good. He holds fourth, and just stays there. I saw him in the first couple of laps. I was like, wow, you're fourth. Like, yeah, fair play. You're going to plummet down the field now. He didn't. He's pulling away with the rest of the pack. And this top sort of five, because Morbidelli was going with them as well, they just drove away from the rest of the pack. And he's the real deal. Matt, he just stayed there. Matt and then Danny.
I'm just going to say I feel so vindicated from our preview show. Because I said, what if he just gets on that bike and rides it smoothly because it's... And then he just does really well, and everyone was like, no, he's going to wring the neck of it and crash in 2 laps. It was an amazing debut. I think they might benefit from not being the factory bike, because maybe it's a little more like what they were used to last season. Like, it's not as complicated. They're not playing as many tricks with dampers and this and that and the other. Like they might have a smaller window that they're dialing it into that they already understood from last season, but I'm not really sure about that. That's just a total guess. If you happen to work for Aprilia and want to let us know what's going on there, by all means, get in touch. But mostly what it was it seemed to be much like Acosta on the KTM. He'd never been on a MotoGP bike. He got on the bike and he was like, oh, this is how you ride it to get the most out of it immediately, because he had no prior conditioning to get in his way.
He was also battling with Bagnaia, really. I mean, he was literally on his tail the whole of the sprint race at points where you thought he's close enough to make a bit of a move here on him. Super impressive. We were kind of spoiled last season with Acosta. This kid's turned up as well, and fingers crossed he has a super exciting season for the rest of the season. Keeps up the strong performances. So, yeah, excited to see what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there that he was hassling Bagnaia, because Bagnaia was almost having to look over his shoulder at some points, and I think it was lap 4 or 5. The commentators, the coverage I watched on DND, the commentators didn't pick up on it at all, but you could see it was on the camera. He made a royal Horlicks and a mess of the final corner. Agura was closing in on Bagnaia. He was right on him, to the point where I thought he might be close enough to make a move into turn 1, and he made a right hash of the last corner, went wide, and he lost about half a second jump to 0.6. He lost the toe to Bagnaia, but then didn't drop back any further. I think his actual pace was matching Bagnaia the whole way through, which is, again, worrying for Bagnaia. Bagnaia couldn't get on top of Alex Marquez there, but they come out and Agura follows them through and ends up finishing fourth, which is incredible on his debut. Like, debut race, absolutely incredible. He kept it really, 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 really calm. And his start, if you look at his start all the way around the outside of turn one, it was amazing. I'd almost forgot about that. He braked so late and just chucked it over the cross of people. It was an amazing start. It's something that we've seen like Rossi do before, or the greats, go in and have we've seen Marquez crazy opening laps and first corners. It was like Marquez Rossi-esque going into turn one. So amazing from Agura. Unfortunately, Bez made a complete meal of the start and spun up. Not really his fault. Sometimes you get a spinny start. So he dropped out. But some other notable mentions from the sprint was Miller. Miller on the Pramac Yamaha was looking really, really, really good. I think he was sitting in like P5 or 6 or something.
4 or 5, yeah, no. And yeah. I think especially for the sprint, you're absolutely right. The sprint, I think, is going to be Yamaha's place to shine initially. We didn't get a good read on the Sunday, but we'll get to that later. But I have a personal theory as to why Miller in particular is making the most of the Yamaha. And I'm going to run this by you and see what you think, because sometimes you just mock my theories endlessly. That's also good content. So, but the biggest issue Yamaha has had is with the rear tire and chatter. And I noticed in the braking zone, his rear tire is almost never actually on the ground. He just manages to go around the whole corner on his front wheel. And so I think that's why he's got the advantage right now in the Yamaha.
He also had a good race here last season, didn't he? If you remember when he was having the battle on the KTM, he looked really good as well. But I'm with you, Carl. I think I messaged you, didn't I? I said Miller were looking great till he was reminded on the dashboard you're not allowed to finish a race, and then chucked it at the scenery as usual. But he'd done a really good performance. And funnily enough, that the Yamahas he was on was obviously stronger than the factory team, really. When you look at the performance, they did an excellent job for the weekend.
And the good thing about this is the way that it flatters him is, and I'm not sure if flatters is the correct word, but he wasn't even directly into Q2. He took P2 in Q1 just by a margin, and then he stormed through in Q2 to take P4 on the grid. So and he was just totally on it, and it was like he's almost like vindicated, getting rid of that KTM and being the crazy do or die Jack Miller again. It was really, really good to see.
Yeah, it was, and that's a great thing you pointed out there, because I forgot who was in P4, and on the grid, Miller, crazy. And I think I was one of the ones who was quite critical of Miller getting the ride, because a lot of people say he's had his chances, so many chances, why has he got the ride again? I think Dorna really wanted an Australian still in the field, but vindicated. You said vindicated. He's got a new lease of life, and he was the top Yamaha all weekend, really, basically, and absolute shock there. So amazing for Miller until he binned it. So let's wrap up the sprint then. So Marc Marquez won, no surprises there, followed home by his brother. They were ecstatic. Really nice scene on the podium with the two of them. They've never finished 1-2 before. Bagnaia in third, Agura an incredible fourth, and Morbidelli trying to reinstate his good name, coming through and finishing fifth. But that top five were quite considerable way in front of the rest of the pack. So that was a sprint. Let's get on to review the Grand Prix. So on the Grand Prix, we'll keep this to three sort of major subjects. And the first one is, wow, I mean, what you can say, the domination from Marc Marquez was frightening for the rest of the field, despite the tyre pressure issues. It would have been a very dull race if it wasn't for the drama that happened on lap 7. I certainly leapt off the sofa because I was sitting there, I was sitting there thinking what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden when he saw Marc looking back or looking behind him, I thought off camera Marc had one of his typical huge front end moments and just caught the bike and was looking round. But then when he let Alex through, you could see all the team didn't know what was going on either. I was like, surely he's made a massive mistake. But as soon as you see him tuck back in behind Alex, and then not immediately pass him. I was like, something's a bit odd here. And then when he saw the replay of, he blatantly did it on purpose. So must be tyre pressure. Absolutely must be tyre pressure. Now, this is quite interesting how this come about. So Ducati, after the race, basically said, our engineers, we're not used to Marc Marquez yet. And Marc himself said he completely changed his style of riding in the race to be safe. So those first opening laps, he said he was just basically cruising and wasn't pushing the tyre hard enough to get the pressure up, which is terrifying for the rest of the pack because he was still easily pulling away.
I'm sorry, did you just use the words Marc Marquez and safe in the same sentence? I don't think I've ever heard that before. It is, but also it isn't, because we don't know what his actual pace would have been if Ducati had gotten the tire pressure right. So a little bit of hopium, a little bit of copium for the season. Don't get too carried away because he was riding with a better tire than anyone else in the field, because the low pressure, better grip. And that's why they have the pressure. That's why they have that rule. Otherwise, as we know from every motorsport that has ever been run under the sun, teams will always generally run the lowest pressure possible to get the most grip. So what's more interesting to me about this is Marquez himself realizing the bike he has is going to allow him to ride it in a different and a much more championship winning style. To me, that's the really scary thing.
Also, it might be an underlining of how important it is to be upfront. Like in the last phase of last season, we already saw Jorge Martin and Bagnaia really being feisty in those first couple of laps to be in the lead, to be able to dictate the pace, and not only dictate it regarding your opponent behind you, but to manage your own race and machinery and tires. And I hope this is not going to be what we're going to see for the coming races in terms of spectacle and fights for the leading position, but also in terms of you need to be upfront, because once you're in second position, you're never going to get close and you're never going to overtake. But then maybe Marc Marquez showed us that doesn't have to be the case. But if you're not an alien, I mean, you saw how difficult it was for Alex to really get tucked into him, and for Bagnaia, etc. So I hope this isn't a premise of what's to come regarding those tire pressures and everything that comes with it.
Can I just say, what a stupid rule. I am sick of hearing about bloody tyre pressures. Same as last season. Just drives you mad. It was, all right, it gave a bit of intrigue into the race, but really, should this be the main talking point from the race with the great riders we've got on show? It's just, they need to do something about it, because it just, I get the safety aspects, I get they're trying to control it, etc. But the last thing they want everybody to be talking about from the race is tyre pressure and what was it. They want to be talking about the riders going at it. And we had some great stories. As you said, nobody could follow. Mark dropped back. He showed he could follow super close. And I know you hit the nail on the head earlier, Carl. It should be terrifying for the rest of the field that he kind of went, I was having a bit of a Sunday ride, thought I had to drop back, so I might have a technical issue, and then away we go.
Yeah, I mean, and you could see, actually, as much as we're going to talk about how easily he got round his brother at the end of the race, you could also see that Alex had clearly lost the best of the rear tire at that point. I mean, it was he had done some damage keeping up the pace, which, of course, if you're looking at the board and it's 0.0 anything with Marquez behind you, you're like, I better be giving it everything I have. But what we're not talking about right now that may shift things some is again, how hot it was at the track. It was 35, 36C. Pavement was over 50C on the Sunday, and riders were coming off of the bikes with burns and blisters. the bike itself is over 100C and there's no relief in sight. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Combs mentioned last year it was that hot and they actually trimmed some laps off the end in the interest of rider safety. And they did not do that. So this could be more of an outlier than we think because it handed a huge advantage to the people, as Jules correctly pointed out, at the front because they're not sucking in an entire field's worth of boiling air.
Yeah, that's a good point. But also on the flip side, I think that makes it even more terrifying for everyone else because after lap 7, when he let Alex through, Mark sat pretty much skimming his rear tyre. He was punting Alex around for like 19 laps. No, not 90 laps. It was like 17 odd laps that he spent behind him. And everyone else was saying, the rider's like, you can't follow. It's too hot. It's too uncomfortable. Your tyre balloons. It goes through the roof and you have tyre pressures. Bagnaia said after the race, as soon as he got anywhere near the back of Alex Marquez, he started having front tyre issues. Mark sat on the rear effortlessly and then passed him and just blew them away. In one sector, he took like 0.5 to 0.7 out of them in one sector, Matt.
He did, but he sat behind him because his front tire was ballooning up to the pressure it was supposed to be at, where everybody else was ballooning way up beyond it and losing grip as a result. And even at that, if you watched carefully, into every corner almost, Mark was not directly behind Alex. He was to the inside, he was to the outside. He was catching a lot of free air wherever he could. And so I maintain until we see them on correct tire pressures where he doesn't have to do that, this is an outlier. I'm not saying he's not going to be dominant, but I'm also saying I don't think we have the evidence that we think we have right now.
At this race, they're going to put Marquez on a flat tyre next race to see if we can blow it up to have some go in the way it's going on. Just to clarify for the listeners, he didn't start on a flat tyre. I know we've gone on it a bit, but yeah, great performance. Like you say, it was interesting to see how close he could go. I think the biggest thing what jumped out to me with the feedback from the riders was I didn't see him get out of shape when he was following Alex. I did not see him get out of shape once, but I agree with Trumpets. Watching Alex at the end of the race, I thought Pecco was going to get him because it was the last 3 or 4 laps. Every time out that second to last corner, he'd just have a kick on the exit and you could see the back just bouncing around trying to get some traction. So I think some riders definitely were struggling. Obviously, the amazing Marquez was going on at the minute mark. Didn't have any issues, but the others, you could tell, were moving around quite a lot.
Yeah. And you could see it, and he had some rear tyre left. Alex said that afterwards. He was like, Mark was just sitting there saving his rear tyre, but you could see him like lifting off and sitting up like early in the straight, and this is where you can start to get the first little bits of, I do think these GP25s or GP24s 0.273s, whatever they are, with a tiny few little bits, you can start to see they have a little bit of a tiny advantage over the GP24s. They're getting off the corner slightly a little bit better, because you see Marquez was rolling down the straight, like 2/3 down the straight. He was pretty much having to sit up and almost roll off to not pass Alex and sit there so quick. So I think we're not going to see it was dramatic last year, the difference between the 23 and the 24, but this year I do think the 25s in inverted commas have a little bit of an edge.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, it was a little bit here, a little bit there, wasn't it? And I think the biggest telltale sign, just going back to the Marquez following, how many times do you see him get that close to a rider and not make a move? All right, it's his brother, but as you say, every time down the straight, he'd just roll off, probably with a third of the straight to go and come in there. Whether that was helping him being able to follow, etc., not too sure. But yeah, certainly an interesting ride there. And I think, as you say, Kyle, the more tracks we go to, we'll start to see if they have got a little bit of extra here and there on cornering or pulling away. It certainly wasn't as dramatic as last season, because me and you were commenting, weren't we? It was like Mark come out the corner and Bagnaia and Martin just took off another half a second down the road. So thank God it's not looking that big of a difference, and hopefully we get a really close title fight. But unfortunately, it doesn't look that way at the minute.
No, it doesn't so much. But another thing which is quite poignant is of him recognising this. I don't know how low the tyre was, or the tyre was like below the pressure. It was on the edge. The engineers had set it. It was on the edge, and he even said once he realised, because they get on their dash, they basically have to spend 60% of the race below a certain value and 40% over a certain value, you know, so it has to be, 60% of the race above a certain pressure value and 40% below it. And he knew in the first few laps that he was below on all of the laps. He was like, I'm below, it's not coming up. And as soon as he realised, he said he started hammering the front brake and braking harder to try to get it up, still couldn't get it up, and then sat behind Alex. And he knew he had a 3-lap margin. So he was like, I know, I just need to sit behind Alex. So we don't know, he was a bit coy about what the pressure was. So I think he instantly, with the heat, come up to where it should have been, and then started ballooning, but he knew he had to sit there because he'd spent so many laps of it out of the zone. So if you're kind of inferring that it was a bit of foul play and he advantage, no, he met the quota like anyone else could have done, but that's what's scary. I think his front tyre was probably ballooned by the time he got with 3 laps left, because he spent that long sitting behind somebody, and then he was almost punting Alex along, wanting to go faster. You can kind of see him. I genuinely thought he was going to take him out at one point, Matt. But yeah, it was just worrying for me for the sake of a close championship. I just thought that, that was really scary how he did that with relative ease.
I understand everything you're saying, and I agree with it all. The point that I would make to those who are hoping that as the season gets further along, there is a championship fight between at least 2 riders. I think we'll see lots of other really good fights amongst all the rest of the bikes. I'm not worried about that. But if you want to fight for the championship, the point I would make is, think about it. Marc Marquez, known for extreme braking and ridiculous riding in general, could not get that tire up to temperature on his own. He needed the help of a bike in front of him, and he needed it enough that he wasn't willing to just wait 2 or 3 laps to see it go into the green and then make a pass. He waited until he was certain he'd done enough laps that it didn't matter the laps that remained. They could all be below pressure and he would still be okay. So was it a flat tire? No. Was it silliness? Was Ducati trying to cut it too close? Yes. Was it intentionally playing with loopholes? No, not at all. I'm sure the engineers were mortified when they discovered that they'd gotten those calculations wrong. Although Marquez was kind enough to say, well, look, I did ride a lot different as the weekend went on. So, and they're just getting used to me. So it's obviously not the first time this sort of thing has happened to him.
Yeah, true. And also we have seen this previously with, I think it was Acosta, when he got a podium last year, or to come in under tyre pressure thing. And I think they found out that it was a slightly leaky rim that he had, so it wasn't his fault, and they let him off. So Todozzi did a really good interview on the TNT after the flag show, and it was quite telling, because you saw the little clip of him in Parc Ferme where he come straight up to Mark, whispered, and he was like, don't say anything. He was like, don't say anything yet. He told Mark not to mention the tyre pressure thing when they're in the Parc Ferme thing, and Mark was a very short interview he did there, but then they kind of elaborated on it more. And Tedeschi said, we're still yet to get the data back, because it could have been a dodgy sensor, could have been a dodgy rim, but he very much seemed to think that we're just not used to Mark yet. We've made a mistake. The engineers made a mistake, basically, with this. And you can see this with Mark when he went to his new chief engineer, and he laughed. He was like, well, you made me work for it today. Like you really made me work for it. You made a mistake, pretty much, and then that was really, really tough. So, we can bang on about how amazing it was all week. We all watched it. It was fine. We can't go down too much about it. But on to Bagnaia a little bit. The worrying thing with Bagnaia is, well, Alex Marquez is going to be a fly in the ointment, and Jules particularly. Yeah, you said this in some of our pre-season preview stuff, and you've said this a lot, that Alex Marquez on a really competitive now GP24 can be getting and interfering in the title fight. Now the pressure's really on Bagnaia. He cannot be finishing behind the customer GP24s. Like he needs to at least be beating Alex Marquez.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Alex Marquez and the other GP24 riders, they are on a spec of last summer, so they're not starting on the basic 24, but with summer updates. But still, you'd expect the 24.5 or 9, whatever we're going to call it, to be like a better bike than the previous one. And it was really, really odd to hear Bagnaia say, I can't get my head around this bike. I can't make it work like I made the 24 work for me. While in reality, it shouldn't be such a different bike. Apart from, as you mentioned, swing arms, some electronics. And it you're not only getting slapped left, right, and center by Marquez, but you're also not confident on the bike you're being given, and that must be really frustrating. And for a guy that is so, as we already noticed last season as well, that's so on top of the feeling the bike gives him, and the tires, and is not at all, or doesn't seem to be at all like Marquez, who said yesterday, "Oh, I just changed my riding style 3 times during the race." It must be like, you could see Bagnaia, he's just puzzled, and he was like, I didn't see him beaten down as such during the whole of last season's finales, when he lost the title eventually, and he was points, 10, 20 points behind Martin, but he just seemed like already like he was in the corner, beaten down.
Yeah, that picture you shared in the group of them and sitting in the press conference, like a picture speaks 1,000 words, and he looked a bit forlorn. Danny?
Yeah, I just want to say on Alex, I thought he rode a brilliant race, and actually when you look at the start, he he got beat by Bagnaia off the line, and he was actually dropped down to 4th place. So he'd done an amazing move around the outside of Iagora at the hairpin, and then obviously got Bagnaia, because Bagnaia had a twitch around the back end of the circuit. But yeah, he didn't get the greatest start, and then he put it there, and as you say, probably expecting Bagnaia to come back at him, but yeah, didn't manage to get past him. I think I know we had a laugh in the pre-season where I said Marquez 1 and 2 in the championship. Hey, I'm not looking so funny now, is it? Hey, you get your bets on. But I certainly think he'll be a strong contender over the season. Maybe not the top 2, but if he keeps up these performances, it was actually a pleasure to see him carry over his performance from testing, because obviously Big Brother gets all the praise, and it's nice to see Alex get just as much this weekend.
And I do like that in the press conference, they sort of asked Mark, so like, if it comes down to that last lap, exactly how hard are you prepared to be with your brother? And he's like, basically, I have no brothers on track. So nice. At least we'll get some fireworks if that's what it comes down to. But am I the only one who noticed that a real theme of this weekend was that the satellite teams generally did better than the factory teams?
Good point.
And I just think it goes to, they don't have as many engineers. The solutions are more straightforward and historically based, and they don't tend to make these huge leaps for brand new technology. It's much more evolutionary. And I can see that changing after a couple of weeks, but right now I'm loving it.
Yeah, and I think just to tip up on that, Trumpets, sometimes you can fiddle too much. I think that may play in their favour. The fact that they've not got hundreds of engineers to go over lots and lots of data. I think they go for a setup, hit the track, make a tweak here and there, and kind of get on with it. They're not pouring over data and data and data hour after hour like the big team. So that could be having an impact.
Yeah, and Marquez and Morbidelli, who had a good weekend as well, Aldeguer, they just have to hop on a bike that was brilliant last season, and it's like you just step in and it's ready to go, and that must be great, especially coming from the GP23 that struggled so much with that new Michelin rear tire. And it just seems like Bagnaia, although the bike isn't that different, is just really struggling with the new bits that are there. And of course, testing for him was, do we go with 25 chassis, engine, aero, or also a mixture of 24 things? But still, it's weird that Marquez he did the same testing, and he doesn't have a problem at all. I think you should question, because that was the point, Kyle, that you were actually referring to. I think you should question how well a winter have Ducati had, really. I mean, of course, they blew away everybody again, but I feel like factually your upgrade to the 25 machinery wasn't great, because else you don't revert to last year's bike with a few new bits. And with all the things going well for them, and I won't deny that, although also the earth is flat. No. I won't deny things going great for them, but I would worry that essentially you had a year's advantage over your nearest rival, which was your own bike from a year ago. And now, how much of that is still there if your 25 bike isn't really where it's supposed to be? And so I think that should be a worry, and you can be critical of that regarding Ducati.
Yeah, fair enough. In Ducati's defence, the GP24 they made last year was stratospheric. It was so far ahead of anyone else. They did such a good job. And this is what essentially they said. They were like, last year's bike was so good that we've tried to improve on it, and they kind of couldn't. And with the customer teams, they semi-intentionally nerfed the customer bikes last year. They gave them the vanilla spec versus the 24, and it was a massive leap. And I think they did that intentionally because they knew a certain rider was jumping on it, and they wanted to guarantee that the new bike won. This season, I don't think they're that worried because they've got the rider on their new bike, so they've given the customer bikes a really strong thing. So I don't think they've thrown away too much advantage. I just don't think that, if you've done almost a perfect job, which they did on the GP24, it's hard to progress perfection. And I think they made gains in some areas, but lost in other areas. So Matt, I don't know. I think they played a little bit safe, but I still think they have quite a heady advantage over the field. But I do get what Jules is saying. It's like, have they dropped the ball in their development game completely? I just think it's almost impossible to develop the near perfect bike, which is what they had.
Well, not every update is an upgrade. Let's go with that. But where I get very curious, like immediately this discussion started, and I had two thoughts. Thought number one was I would love to see Marquez and Bagnaia on the 24 Ducati at the end of last season. I'd be very curious how that turned out compared to the bike that they're on, which was last year's bike, plus some new bits. And then I begin to wonder, well, how did the choice come about exactly for the new bits? Was this through testing? Did Marquez and Bagnaia both have input? Did they maybe go with Marquez and his speed on the new bits versus Bagnaia? Or could they appoint each bike the way they want? And it's a question of Bagnaia looking at Marquez and saying, okay, he's faster for now, but I have all his data. This is a puzzle that I think I can solve.
Okay, so yeah, they can, in theory, they can do what they like with with any of their riders. So Digi's in theory on a GP25. We can probably expect Digi to take some of the new bits. Digi put himself out of testing, so he didn't really get a say. He just got what the factory guys did. But Bagnaia was quite vocal against the 25 bits himself, so they all tested it. They all had the option, and where the 25 bits really struggled was stability under braking, and that's arguably Bagnaia's biggest strength. And I don't think he wanted to nerf his own biggest strength as well. So he could have taken the 25 bits. And there is a test in May after the Jerez round where they said they'll probably revisit the chassis and the aero again. So I'd imagine if Bagnaia is lagging still, I'd imagine he might just take a risk and a punt just to try to take those bits anyway. I can't see Marquez wanting to change. He's probably going to stick. So that might be Bagnaia's chance. Because remember, Bagnaia tested this frame at Misano last year, the 25-bit, and said he really liked it. But then in his other test, he said he's discovered some negative bits. That's interesting. We'll move on now from Ducati. I promise we're not going to lord over Marc Marquez anymore. We've done that quite enough. One person I want to lord a bit over was Agura. Amazing Agura. Again, surely he was going to play rookie. He was going to remember that he was a rookie and remember that he probably needs to crash or do something a bit silly in the Grand Prix. But no, he didn't. 5th place, just behind Morbidelli. And again, he's with the front group. He was only 7.4 seconds away from Marc Marquez winning. Like, that's nuts. And they were, again, this top 5 were leaps and bounds ahead of the other group. So here again, his best of the rest, top non-Ducati, really good. And this is super positive signs for when Jorge Martin does come back, because again, Bezzecchi had a bit of a messy race, was pretty happy after the race, but Ogura just absolutely smashed it. Like, the race pace was brilliant, no mistakes, really difficult conditions. Like his teammate as well, we saw Fernandez up there. And Fernandez, he's carrying some injuries from pre-season, and he actually ended up, the heat got to him in the end, and he had to retire. So, like, that was a rider physical issue. He just had to retire because the Aprilia is famed for being way too hot and cooking its riders. But Bezzecchi actually said it wasn't too bad at the end. He goes, it wasn't as bad as he first thought. But last year, we certainly had Maverick and Aleix really complaining a lot in the hot races that the bike was just horrible to ride. A few riders really suffered with that, Rins being a big one. Did you see Rins's legs? Like Rins has actually got burns on his legs, Jules.
Yeah, there were quite a few riders complaining of heat problems, blisters, burn marks. I think both Digi on Saturday and Raul Fernandez on Sunday quit. Basically, they entered the pits because their bike was just too hot to, literally too hot to handle. So, but none of that for Ogura. And I thought it was really telling on Saturday after the sprint that the podium guys, they weren't initially talking about, nice to be on the podium or whatever. They were all like, yeah, but what about Ogura? Did you see him? And Bahia admitted, like, yeah, it wasn't like I was easily pacing him. I had to defend. So pretty impressive, especially because in the more junior classes, the Moto2 and Moto3, he is of course the reigning Moto2 champion, but it's like he has on and off seasons, but then his off seasons are like really off, and not like, oh, I'm finishing second in the standings. But so I remember last season when he was named a Trackhouse driver, there was quite some reluctancy in the reactions to that, because some people thought it had to be Joe Roberts because American team and we need an American rider, and Ogura, but I mean, I know he's from the continent, but it's not like this is his home race and he knows the track really well or whatever. So yeah, it was just, and to repeat it basically on the Sunday in the long race, really, really nice to see a rookie coming in like that, as we saw Acosta last season, and it will be just great if he could, emulate that through the season.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think it was Davide Brivio, the team boss, who pulled the pin and actually overruled everyone. I think everyone wanted Joe Roberts, and I think I was even actually a bit outspoken about that, because I was like, it'd be great for the sport. We want an American on the grid, and it would have been perfect. And Joe Roberts seems like a very nice chap as well, so it would have been quite nice to have him into MotoGP. But you'd have to say Brivio's been absolutely vindicated, and he looks really happy in his interviews. He was beaming from ear to ear. He couldn't believe it, and it's really nice to have a top Japanese talent again up in the class, a really fast Japanese rider in there, which is really, really good. And I loved the whole, like, Ogura's mannerisms. I just loved his whole mannerisms. If you just saw that mannerism, I was doing a cue for one of my panels, so excuse that mannerism I just did. But yeah, I just love the fact that how chilled he was and how completely just calm. He wasn't like ecstatic, nonplussed. He was just like, yeah, I did a nice job. The bike was okay. The bike was good. He was just so calm and matter of fact about it, Danny. Like, what an introduction to MotoGP.
Yeah, real mature kid, I think. Just kept his head, didn't get too excited, focused on the task at hand and delivered when he needed to. And I think, we need a top Japanese rider coming through, because You know, I remember when I first started watching, you got Arbe and that with his long hair hanging out the back of the helmet.
Yeah.
We need something because they are really good, you know, top riders, and some excellent characters come out there with a sense of humour. So, yeah, real good rookie to come in. I think it shows as well that the kids coming up are, you know, as in other motorsports as well, as prepared as they can be. They kind of come in, hit the ground running, the special ones, and deliver the performance when and as required. And as I say, the test of him really is, does he go a bit like a Costa, have some early season high performances and then kind of drop off mid-season as he finds his feet and kind of come back towards the end? We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, certainly great out the blocks, and yeah, cool livery as well to go. And we all know a racing stripe makes you go at least 2 tenths faster.
Yeah, clearly the Gulf livery was the main reason why he finished so high up the grid. But I love it. And I agree, like, with Danny very much. I think I'm going to go with satellite teams having the advantage because they focus on the big things early season and they don't have enough engineers to get confused about the small things. But there will come a time where the factory teams are better. And then it's a question of, does he try to ride beyond the parameters of the bike that he still has? Which is, I think, what we really saw Acosta do during the second half of the season. And what, I mean, we saw, I thought of it as almost a jokey thing. It's like, how many laps can Honda go at the pace of the field before the riders fall off? And then throughout the season, it got to be more laps. So you're like, okay, well, that's progress. But, you know, where he draws that line and how carefully he draws that line will be a real test. But as you said at the beginning of the show, this is the best debut for a rider since Marquez came into the sport. And with Acosta last season, the good news for Dorna and MotoGP is we are not going to be bereft of battles anytime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, yeah, I'm sure when we get to different tracks and the field closes up, we are going to have some epic battles. And, well, another really good positive into this, manufacturers are closing up. The whole field from the manufacturers does very much seem like it is closing up. So, yeah, it might be a bit distant at the front, but, you know, this is a one race sample, but it's so positive to see that coming through. And, yeah, he was top rookie. So while on the rookies, Fermin Aldeguer, I thought, was a bit disappointing, really. We all rated him was easily going to be the standout rookie this year. We even thought he would be pinching podiums, maybe like a win. And he looks really good in Sepang, I think. But then he's not really got his head around this Thai track very well. And yeah, the temperatures were scorching as well. This was a hard race, and there was tyre issues throughout the thing, which makes Agura's performance look even more impressive. But you had Somkat Chantra as well, who wasn't last again, so fair play, wasn't last, but he's on a Honda, which is, you know, that's a tough gig. So just amazing by Agura and very welcome. I don't think there was an unhappy person in the paddock at all. So before we go on to our next subject, I'd just like to do a little interlude. If you like the show, then why not give us a follow on Twitter at MrApexMoto. That is at MrApexMoto on Twitter, or give us a subscribe on YouTube. You can watch YouTube, you can see our beautiful faces, you can see what the fine specimens of Jules, Trumpets and Danny, see how punchable my face is. Why not come and check us out and give us a subscribe on there? That's at, well, it's not an at, that's just MrApexMoto on YouTube as well, and you should be able to find us. Or perhaps you'd like to tell us how wrong we are, or give us some feedback, or give us a bit of stick. If that's the case, then you can send us an email to mistapexmoto@gmail.com. That's mistapexmoto with a capital M for the mist at gmail.com. So we'll move on to our final topic then, and that's going to be best of the rest and some honourable mentions. So, guys, I'd like to start with some honourable mentions. Honda are coming back. They've almost, well, apart from Miller, they've almost jumped Yamaha, and there was a happy Johan Mir. Actually, a positive interview from Johan Mir. It's the first time we've seen that for a while, Jules.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone was sour pretty much every weekend during 2024, it was Johan Mir, and also because he seemed to crash every weekend. But yeah, I really hope this is like genuine, that the Honda pace is on merit. I think it's encouraging that it was not only a factory bike, but it was also Johan Zarco on the LCR, which, by the way, I think has a way better Castrol livery than the Honda factory. But okay, that doesn't matter right now. But I think that's encouraging, but it was also totally out of the blue, because even after the tests, the winter tests, it just seemed like, oh yeah, everybody made a step, and Yamaha this, and KTM not as bad as we might have feared, but Honda, and this is great. And Mir even said, like, we could have finished top 5. So let's hope he's right.
I mean, part of the reason he was so miserable last season as well, Jules, is because he was riding a Honda. I mean, it has got slightly better, but yeah, I think they put in some solid performances watching them through practice and qualifying. I was actually quite shocked when I was watching qualifying to see how well they were doing. And like I say, Mir sounds pretty good. I mean, unfortunately, he's still at the deck, so he needs to kind of cut that out, doesn't he, and try and get it on there. And yeah, good to see him coming about. You know, I joke about Marini as well, but good to see him in the timesheets, not at the back, drooling around. We actually got to see a little bit of TV coverage of him. And as well, the Yamahas are looking excellent. So fingers crossed they're starting to get closer to the front of the grid. And as Trumpets said earlier, actually, it was the satellite bikes what we're kind of getting the performances over the factory team. So keep that up as well. It's great to get everybody in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, Trumpets, carry on.
No, I was going to say more bikes, more data, more good for engineers. But I was kind of laughing when you were talking about Mir falling off, because I can just imagine his brief every race was, please go as fast as possible till you fall off. And for a whole season, that gets really old.
Yeah, he had many, many early showers. I think he was just cashing his paycheck in and goes, right, if I bin it on lap 4, I can make that early flight. That's what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to chuck it down the road and get a thing. But in this race, he was going really well. He binned it out of 7th. And in the sprint, he scored his first points in a sprint since Jerez last year, which is crazy. Which is absolutely great. And I think the sprint race in Jerez last year, wasn't that a bit dodgy weather? It was a bit, and loads of people crashed. And I think it was a bit of a luck freak result that he got that. So this was like genuine pace. Zarco did come through on the Castrol bike, which I agree with Jules, is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Zarco come through and got 7th, and yeah, Mir was really upbeat, and yeah, Marini wasn't too far off, as Danny said. So that was a shock. Yeah, in testing we thought they were going to be nailed on last place, but it wasn't. But some people who were looking nailed on last place in testing, again, pulled a bit of a blinder out. Enea Bastianini, P9 from absolutely nowhere, from him after testing, seeing the most downbeat rider on the grid, just saying, I'm just not compatible with this bike, I can't ride it, to having a crazy spurt of late race pace, Danny, and coming back through and nicking P9 just behind Binder.
Yep. Never mind the beast. He should be called the robber or the magician or something, because he was nowhere, weren't he, all weekend? He showed no pace whatsoever. I can't remember seeing Vinales, if I'm honest. He was just non-existent as well. So, yeah, he did a great result. Now, whether that was the famous late race pace coming on or not, but he certainly savoured it and got a performance at the end of the day. But worrying signs for him, because like we said last season, I'm quite a fan of Bastianini, and hopefully he gets some performances, but he was been worryingly quiet all weekend until, as we say, the last couple of laps of the race when he started to get up the field.
Yeah, and I think once he got his head around the bike, he's been really struggling on new tyres, and after testing, I'm not sure he did that many super long runs, but he actually said after the race that I can actually, one of my biggest strengths I can exploit with this bike, because it's a bit worrying for KTM, because Acosta binned it, he crashed out 7th, and then he got back on and completed the race, but said he had catastrophic tyre wear towards the end. Binder struggled with loads of tyre wear. They haven't got rid of their problems of chewing the tyres, but this plays right into Bastianini's hands, because he's traditionally amazingly gentle on tyres, so it kind of plays with him. Batmav, Stealth Mav, he was nowhere the enigma of Maverick Vinales, because he was the one. he was the one, Jules, who was actually looking probably the most optimistic out of the satellite KTM guys.
Yeah, and again, I think after another team change for Maverick, we were all again like, okay, so maybe this team and this bike will get him going again, like the good days that he definitely had at Suzuki and early Yamaha days. But I mean, he qualified in front of Bastianini, 18th, and Bastianini qualified 20th. And if you see, like, he finished 60th, so he made up 2 places, probably because guys in front of him crashed. And if you see what Bastianini did, I mean, oh man, if somebody had a bad night on Sunday, it must have been Maverick.
Yeah, absolutely. Because Bastianini he was still sitting P16 on lap 14. And then all of a sudden, he had tyre left, and he just went forward, absolutely crazy, Danny. And given a couple more laps, I think he probably would have got Binder.
Yeah, he looked like he had some proper pace coming up to Binder, and looking at him, new team, first race, probably wants to try and put a move on him, get some early points on the board. But just touching on the point of Viñales, I've said before on the podcast, it's amazing when it comes to Maverick, because I watched him in the younger days in the earlier Formula, and he was nigh on unbeatable. He was such a good young rider. I had so many, obviously, again, being a Top Gun fan, his name, etc. I was such a fan early on, and I expected him to hit MotoGP and be, not maybe Marquez, but I expected him to be like Bagnaia, Martin level, got a championship. And it's just, as a fan, it is so disappointing to see the struggles he's had to go through, and him kind of start well, and then he goes disappear. And I mean, for the love of God, come back and just get in some decent performances. Be great to see him get up to the front and finally deliver on the talent what he's got, because the talent he has is unbelievable. He just needs to consistently get on top of it.
And I think that brings us to the real issue here, which may not even be the talent, but the bike itself and the company itself. You would not have thought after last season that going to KTM would have been maybe where you went if you weren't at Ducati, because they looked like they were pushing. Acosta looked incredible on the bike. But I got to say, when push came to shove at the first race weekend, they were not looking great. And I'm really worried that the larger external factors here, with all the business stuff, is going to have a very negative impact, and that's going to be bad for the whole sport.
That's a really good point, because what's one thing we really, really want to see now is KTM doing amazing to convince the stakeholders that they're going to keep with it, because they're still throwing a lot of money. And as Trumpet said, and we covered this at the end of last year, that worrying times for KTM. They have said, I think they've been secured now, and they said they are going to stick with it. But we don't want to see them floundering and going backwards, basically. We'd love to see KTM really strong to give them that encouragement to carry on in the sport. We're running out of time, so we'll just briefly just go over that. Yamaha sort of were looking really good in Miller's hands, but the actual factory boys, Quattararo had a weird weekend and never hooked it up, and Rins was anonymous most of the weekend. They had an absolute mare, but they both finished behind the Pramac bikes. The thing, and Miller ended up 11th in the end in the Grand Prix, but I think he could have been way higher because his fairing really early in the race come loose, and he was having to try and hold it together and couldn't corner properly, and kept thinking it was going to just fly off and smack him in the face, Jules.
And also, and this kind of got lost in everything, all the Yamahas started on the hard soft on Sunday, and I think they were the only ones.
On the hard tyres, really?
Yeah, and the hard front. And it's just, it kind of explained why Miller had a really good few opening laps, and then gradually he started falling back, which was a real shame. I mean, we already mentioned his Saturday. So again, let's just hope that this is genuine, and that Fabio Quartararo can pick up, so we can see a lot more and a lot of different brands like we did this weekend.
I just confirm, I looked it up, and you're right about the hard tires. They were on the hard fronts on Sunday.
Wow. It's good. Nice one, Jules. Good spot. I completely missed that. So let's move on then. So the championship standings, we've got Marc Marquez on 37 points with a commanding lead. A commanding lead of all of 8 points over his brother, which he'd think's pretty commanding, but that's a pretty good haul of points after the first round. Bagnaya's in third, 24, 3 points, 14 back. Morbidelli's actually in fourth, with Ayagura in fifth. They're 19 and 20 points back, respectively. So we'll quickly do some awards. And the first one, the Rider of the Weekend. Trumpets, who's your Rider of the Weekend?
Oh, my Rider of the Weekend's Agura, no doubt about it. I love an underdog. I love the Aprilia fight and the fact that a stone cold rookie walked in the door and led the effort this weekend. I mean, how can you get better than that?
Can't argue with that. Danny, who was your Rider of the Weekend?
None other than Mr. Marquez. Just unbelievable.
Which one?
Well, Mark, obviously. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Unbelievable. Great in testing, hit the track, was as close to perfection as we've seen Bagnaia in the past. Incredible ride, my Rider of the Weekend.
Yep, hard to argue against that as well. Jules, who was yours?
I'm going Franco Morbidelli, which
redemption story.
may sound a bit odd, but I mean, last season people were like, why is he even getting a ride in 25, let alone on a Ducati? But I think this weekend he finished fifth and fourth, and he's fourth in the standings at this point. And, you know, cut him some slack, and I think he did a really, really proper, good job.
Yeah, solid. Absolutely solid redemption streak for Morbidelli. My Rider of the Weekend, I'm going to give it to Alex Marquez. I predicted him to be on the deck, and he wasn't on the deck at all and was absolutely solid. So fair play, really strong pair of second places then for him. So we'll move on to Moment of the Weekend quickly, and we'll stick with you, Jules. What was your Moment of the Weekend?
It was a moment of pure class, quality, skill, and also maybe a bit disheartening for the people who wanted close racing. It was the moment when Marquez overtook Alex in the final stages, and the first time the time difference was shown on the graphics. And I think it was 0.7 within half a lap. And it was, okay, that's making your mark.
Nice. Oh, finish with a pun. Love it. Danny, what was your Moment of the Weekend?
I'm going to stick with the Marquez family, and it was Alex's overtake on Ayagura. Thought it was amazing down at the hairpin round the outside. Excellent overtake.
Nice. Like that one. Trumpets, what was yours?
Well, now I'm split because I was convinced someone would take the one that I originally had on track, but I have an off track one too. So I reserve the right to come back to my on track one if you don't take it, Kyle. Mm-hmm. And I'm going with the fan, the Marquez fan, the little Thai Marquez fan in the leathers and getting the full royal treatment by Mark. I think that was so classy and amazing. And this is the one that they found last year. He had the 93 buzz cut into his hair. And then when Mark fell, he was in tears. They found him, brought him down to Ducati, gave him full leathers, which he wore to the track in that temperature. I cannot believe that they did that. And it was just the best thing.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. I've got a theory, and we've seen this in Formula One previously. This is the first mention we've ever had of Formula One at the end. We almost made a whole show, and I've ruined it. But Formula One of Kimi Raikkonen and the crying fan. So if anybody has a child they'd like to lend me to take to a race, I'll make the child cry, get on camera, and get free VIP tickets. That's the way to do it. My moment of the weekend was the Todozzi interview in the After the Flag show, actually. And for one major reason, he seemed almost annoyed at Bagnaia's lack of performance. And he said, basically, Bagnaia is going to be very, very quick in Qatar. He's a bit lost at the moment, but be quick at Qatar, which I was amazed he kind of said that. But it was the way he delivered it. And I was like, oh, that's like, yeah, I think he seemed annoyed that the Grassini beat them. So, I don't know, something bubbling on there. That's interesting. Why don't you follow the panel? Danny, where can people follow you?
You can follow me on X at Danny Henny F1.
Lovely. And Jules, where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Blue Sky, and my handle is Jules on Racing.
Nice. You have fled from the Twitters then. I think we're all going to be following suit very quickly. Trumpets, where can people follow you?
Pretty much at MattPT55 on any social media you like.
Excellent. And you can follow me. I'm currently on the Twitters, but we'll be moving over to Blue Sky soon. That's at Kyle Power F1. We'll be back again in 2 weeks to review round 2, the Grand Prix of Argentina. As always, thanks for listening to Missed Apex MotoGP.